Thanks for being here. It's a pleasure for me to be here in Tulsa. We left some pretty nasty winter weather in Minneapolis, and now it sounds like we're going back to it. So today I'm going to talk about two very different projects. One is a very large-scale project, and one is a very small-scale project. And I'm not going to focus on the design so much as I'm going to focus on, as Kevin mentioned earlier, he was talking about stacked functions, and that how stormwater projects, in my opinion today, have to be more than just stormwater projects. They're expensive, they require a lot of real estate, and we need to get more out of our stormwater projects than just stormwater. We need to create amenities for the environment and for people that live in that environment. So the first project I'm going to talk about is called the 37th Avenue Greenway. It is in North Minneapolis. It is a neighborhood that has been prone to flooding. It's a fully developed residential neighborhood developed between 1920s and 1940s and 50s. Pretty small lots and pretty dense. The area of our project where we started, the blue represents flooding for a 100-year flood. So you can see there's quite a bit. We started in the upper left corner. This is some examples of what the neighborhood has to deal with. Not all that infrequently, unfortunately. So the neighborhood, understandably, is a little upset. They want something done. There's very little place to do anything because of the development. It's fully developed. This is the discharge. This is the actual discharge to Crystal Lake. And Crystal Lake itself has a lot of flooding problems. It has some severe water quality problems, big algae blooms in the summer, things like that. So water quality is an issue. Water volume and peak discharge is definitely an issue. So historically, we solve these problems a lot by putting in bigger and bigger pipes, take that water that's flooding, flush it downstream, basically make it somebody else's problem. Well, in this case, because of a number of different reasons, we can't do that. Another tact has been, why don't you just take those flood-prone houses and tear them down? Make vacant lots out of them, basically. Kind of the reverse of what we just heard. Well, that has been politically a very unpopular thing in the city of Minneapolis. They used to do this, and it started to kind of destroy the fabric of the neighborhood. And the issues that we heard about and that became very significant is the empty lot problem, the reduced property value, attracts people for loitering. It basically becomes a nuisance. And the idea was, well, okay, maybe if we tear down 3 houses in a row, then it becomes a pocket park. The Minneapolis Park Board said, we don't need any more parks. We got enough parks, and the last thing we want is this little tiny pocket park that's not good for anything except inviting trouble. So that was off the board. I will say though that this would have been, from a strict cost perspective, the cheapest route by far. So what can be done? We got a serious problem. We got a flooding problem. This is the actual 37th Avenue standing on close to one end of the project. Right away, 60 feet. So the concept was to make it a greenway. And the greenway was going to have many components in it that were going to solve both flooding problems and water quality problems. So here's a plan view, one segment of the greenway. This isn't the whole greenway, but it kind of gives you a sense of what we're looking at. This is a cross street. On two ends of the project, we reduced the two-way street down to a one-way street, and what that did was give us extra green space for stormwater storage and for water quality treatment. The rest of the way, we converted to a 10-foot wide pedestrian and bike path. It's a combined path used for both. This is the alley. And what's interesting about having alleys is that these people, these are what we call short blocks. So all the houses face these cross streets. So the houses are not facing the street, 37th Avenue that we're talking about. But these people had garages that went to 37th. So big change for these people. Now they no longer have a street to pull out on. So they have now access to a 2-block long alley. So other than the fact that their street was eliminated, everybody in the neighborhood now has a different alley configuration to deal with. I should mention that there was a rather extensive public involvement process and a process with the city. This was a city-sponsored project, so that helped us get over the city hurdles. But the neighborhood was understandably concerned, and I think eventually they've been very supportive of it, in fact. So this is that segment I just showed you. There's a park here on the road ends. This is a one-way going that way. We've got 4 blocks of trail, and then another one-way on this end. Fast forward through construction, this is what it looks like today. Actually, it doesn't look exactly like this today because this was last year. These fences have come down. These fences were there just for the establishment period. The city was concerned about plants getting trampled and maybe even stolen. We have had that problem on projects, especially right after they're put in. You know how easy it is to grab a clump of grass and run off with it and plant it in your own yard? It's very easy if you want to try it. Just don't get caught. So this is an alley. Here's a cross street. This is the path. As you can see, it winds through the neighborhood. These inlets here are in the alley. They feed what we call biofiltration basins. This is all clay soil here, so we've got under drains and everything. The under drains are surrounded with sand, and that sand has iron filings mixed into it. And iron has been shown to reduce soluble phosphorus, or remove soluble phosphorus. It's at a 5% ratio in this project. So here it is on the full length altogether. And the reason I show this is the blue is our storage. There's about 1,400 feet of underground storage as part of this. So all that blue you saw on the surface, that water's got to go somewhere. We could not increase the rate to Crystal Lake. So all that water that was stored in people's garages and their basements and in their street, we had to store that water somewhere. And that water is all stored underneath the Greenway in underground storage. There's 3.8 acre feet of underground storage. If you know your acre feet, that's a lot. So this is a typical conceptual cross-section from early in the design process. So here's your underground storage. Path on top, depressions on either side, which are the biofiltration basins. Under construction, these are very significant in size. And we used precast box culvert sections. We did give the contractor multiple options of underground storage, and they were allowed to come up with what was the most cost effective. We looked at they could use storm trap. Are you familiar with storm trap? So they could do that or this version. The issue was that the right of way was so narrow, and we had grade issues too. So we had a storm sewer we had to connect to on the downstream side. So we were limited to how deep we could go. And so we had to be super efficient with our storage. And that's why the square structures work the best. So here's another during construction, running right down the center of the right of way. You can see the person down here, give a little perspective. This one actually filled with sediment after a storm, and they lowered a skid steer down inside it to clean it out. So, if you lived in this neighborhood, would this freak you out? If that was your house on either side and this was going on? So people were pretty freaked out, I have to say. but we did restrict the contractor. They were only allowed to take out 1 block of pavement ahead of their work. So they weren't allowed to go in and blast out the whole project. They had to advance and then button up from behind at the same time to minimize the impact. These are the basins. This was in less than a year. They were planted in the fall. This would have been the next summer. So this was less than a full year. We planted 4-inch pots. A lot of this is cordgrass. We kept the palette very, very simple. Each one of these gardens had maybe 3 species in it. And that way it was a visual thing. It looked neat because it wasn't a lot of busy things. Plus it was much, much easier for maintenance. Or is. And there's trees planted in here too. You can see one in the foreground. There were boulevard trees all along on both sides. They were ginkgos, surprisingly. Not really common where we are. And what we did is we alternated the trail back and forth. There was 2 reasons for that. One was visually, it didn't look like a street. It meandered when you looked down it. And 2, we saved trees on one side, and then on the other side, and then on the other side. Again, here's the transformation. So this stormwater project truly became an amenity for this neighborhood. People really like it. People that live in this neighborhood really like it. It has created more green space for them. It has slowed down traffic and reduced the amount of traffic with some of those one-way streets that we were talking about. There's a signalized intersection, and people routinely cut through this neighborhood to avoid the light if they were making a right or a left turn. So they would cut through the neighborhood, and we aligned that one way to discourage that. We worked with the traffic department, and we decided which was the best direction for the one-way to prevent people from cutting through, and it really worked. Property values have increased. We saw an ad, a house was being listed about 3 houses away, and in the advertisement for the house was reference and sort of bragging that they were close to this greenway. So if that doesn't tell you that people were realizing the value and the increased value of this. It is a neighborhood connection to a park. Like I mentioned before, talk to people. There's this better feeling of safety. It's actively used as a bike connection, both to the park, and is great for community health and wellness. And what I thought was so telling about how much this was used, what do you see in this pavement here? It's footprints and it's bike tracks. This was the day after it was paved. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. And I think it's a testament to how much people are really using it. So, on to my next project. Much different. The other one being 5 blocks long. This one is 384 square feet. This is, and it's still there, this is a bog, a northern bog, on a roof of a college called MCAD, Minneapolis College of Art and Design. And it started as an art project. Earlier this morning I said, if you're an engineer, how many engineers in here? 1. Well, then never mind. No, landscape architects, okay, students, I get almost everybody, planners, who am I missing? Architects, good, I'm glad you said that, because my point is, as a designer, if you're an engineer or one of the 3 I'm going to list, you should get to know each other. Architects have to work with landscape architects in green infrastructure, because you each know something very different, and you need to bring those together and do that. It's also, in many projects, extremely helpful to have an architect that you can consult with. because there's a lot of architectural elements in green infrastructure as well. And lastly, and this is becoming more and more popular in the work we're doing, is get to know a public artist. Public artists know, they think differently than engineers, right? And maybe even a little bit from architects. And there's all this overlap and all this synergy that can be created with all those different kinds of things. So we work with a public artist. She came to us with this idea. She had an art installation, she got a grant, she wanted to build this bog on this roof, and she said, I want to build this bog, I want to take something from northern Minnesota and take it totally out of context and put it in Minneapolis on a roof. Wouldn't that be cool? It's like, oh yeah, I guess. If the roof is going to hold it, and all these other things started going through my mind. She goes, that's why I need to talk to you. And I work with a landscape architect and landscape ecologist. And so this was an installation and an exhibit that was part of what's called Northern Spark in Minneapolis. Northern Spark is an all-night, one-night art exhibition, installation thing that starts when it gets dark and ends when the sun comes up. And there's things all over the city. Actually, this year it was in St. Paul, to be fair to St. Paul. St. Paul gets the bad rub all the time because everybody thinks about Minneapolis. Anyway, so this was part of that. That's where it all started. Yes? Oh, perfect. So the question is, can an art installation be a stormwater BMP? And I'll let you decide. So here's how this thing works. So you have the bog here, we've got a cistern. This was made by one of the artists at the college. She's an amazing worker with steel. And she made the cistern out of a piece of pipe. It's 365 gallons. There's a pump, which I will show you, that's connected to a solar panel. It's a solar powered pump. The solar panel's here. The wire runs all the way across. You know what that is? That's to keep you warm in the winter between buildings. Called a skyway, just in case you didn't know. So the roof is, you can barely see it right there. Solar panel, really small. I think it's 18 inches by 18 inches. Here's the solar pump. Very small line. I only blew out the booster once, hooking it up. I ended up having to put all this stuff together too because we basically had no money and no budget to do this. And I'm not an electrician, and I proved it. It was only $260 to replace the parts. Okay, so here's how it works. This is the cistern, the top of the cistern. Here's the tubing that you can kind of see. The tubing goes up, discharges. You can kind of see the trickle by the red arrow. There's a little pond up there. Comes out this scupper, drops back down into the cistern, and just keeps recirculating. Like the hydrologic cycle. I thought this was kind of cool. So like the ocean or a lake is the cistern, the pump is evaporation, bog roof is your wetland, stream is your scupper. I thought that was kind of, anyway. Can't let this dry out. A bog requires water. There's 2 inches of water on top of that roof all the time. It has to stay there, and it evaporates, and the plants use it and transpire it. So we have a water backup into the cistern. So when the cistern gets to a certain elevation, there's a valve that automatically puts water back in the cistern so it doesn't dry out. We metered it, engineer, got to know what's going on, put a bunch of valves and dials and stuff on it because it's cool. Education. So there's a sign. So one of the benefits here, in addition to this being totally out of context, is education. This is right next to the cistern. There's a logbook there. In that logbook, we encourage people that came by to look at the gauges and temperature and write in the book what you saw. I don't know if you noticed this, but the handwriting in the envelope's pretty much the same. That's my handwriting. I went there a lot. Nobody wrote in it. So they wrote stuff like this. So the book got a little wet, so pardon the smeary stuff. But I don't know what any of this had to do with the bog. Like it's a dinosaur or what? There were some other entries that I couldn't include. People, yeah, having a good time. So this is a summary from a stormwater standpoint. So with all those gauges, and we had a rain gauge up there too. These are the calculations that gave us a good sense of how much water we were actually consuming on a daily basis. It averaged out to about 15 gallons a day. And so if you add up those two, the total rainfall and the backup water, that's how much water we lost from this roof over the course of a summer. So it really does reduce the volume of stormwater runoff. So visually interesting, one of my biggest things that made me so proud and happy to be part of this project is we'd be tinkering or doing something with fixing something, and people would walk up and they'd stop and they'd go, "Oh wow," and they'd get happy, like instantly. It's like, that was great for me. That made me happy. Year-round interest, tamaracks are really unusual. If you don't know about tamarack trees, they are actually a deciduous tree. They drop their needles every single year. So in the fall, they turn bright yellow. They drop. They look dead. Everybody freaks out. Oh, our trees have all died. And then in the spring, they emerge with super green, like almost fluorescent green needles. So it's awesome. There it is, frozen. Any questions? Yes?
From an engineering perspective, I guess, like, did the roof, was it already able to handle all that weight from the water?
It's starting to cave in. No, I'm just kidding. So you can imagine the facilities director of the college who's responsible for keeping leaks out and things standing. He was very, very concerned about this. So we had a structural engineer do a full analysis on it, and the only caveat was that if we got more than 3 feet of snow on it, we'd have to shovel it. That hasn't happened, but yeah. So we did look at that. Yes.
How deep is it, and is that going to limit your plant growth there?
So, I know we're running out of time, but these plants were. Let me get you a better picture of the plants. Roar. Those plants were salvaged from a bog in northern Minnesota. There was a utility corridor going through a pipeline, and we got a company that specializes in doing this sort of thing. They went out there and salvaged these, and they put them in 1 foot by 2 foot trays, and they just dug them up in place and packed them into these trays. And with some soil and the sphagnum moss and everything that was attached to them. And when this got installed, the trays came down in a truck, they passed them up, and they just packed them in pretty much random order, and that's all that's there. It's 2 inches of water and whatever came with those plugs. The trees, there's like 8 tamarack trees on the top. Since we planted them, have grown 2 feet. They're growing too fast. They're still in their pots. We left them in their pots so that it would hopefully stunt their growth, and they're doing too well, actually. So there was 45 species when we started, identified. Several emerged over the course of the summer. Some of them have receded. Some of them have disappeared. We're probably at about 35 at this point, and it's slowly changing. And this will be our 3rd summer this summer. And it remains to be seen if it remains permanent.